I wonder what you think the public tolerance is for initiating a legal proceeding against a domestic defendant that's the beneficiary of stolen IT, but is unwitting, doesn't realize that the products that they're selling have benefited from the sale of a stolen technology or stolen intellectual property.
When we're talking about our apparel case, there obviously there are retailers in this country who import substantial volumes of these apparel products from the companies that we've gone after. And there's no doubt in my mind, speaking just for myself, that these companies, whether it's Forever 21, Walmart, Gap, Target, you name it, they're not tracking, oh, okay, our clothes come from this apparel manufacturer and we figured out they're stealing IP and so we got to stop. There's no doubt in my mind they don't know. And it's just the way the supply chain works. They just want to get their goods, they want to get it cheap, that's all they really care about. So part of the process is education, and that's what Tiffany here, that's her function, and they're doing a great job with that. But we believe that there's no point in going after people who don't know. Really, I mean, they're not even part of the competitive process. So they're looking at American apparel manufacturers and overseas, and they're making a judgment just based on, costs and quality, because that's all they know, that's all they have time to look at. So our job is to make sure that there's a fair competitive process so that when retailers go in to make that call, they're making it based on the fact that there's a fair competitive process that's in existence, that they know that whatever they're getting at the best price and the best quality wasn't obtained by an unfair competitive advantage. So to focus on them is really not to focus on where the problem is. And we prefer, our general prefers this very strongly, that we focus on where the problem is. We try to fix that problem. And if we can't settle, then in our view, getting an order that bars these goods from coming into the country will, from a perspective of California, will fix the problem, because then we can now make a statement, now we know, and now retailers will know that these clothes, the competitive advantage is due to theft. And that will help retailers and help folks make an informed judgment. And that's what our general is looking for here.
I wonder, Andy, in the larger set of issues that firms face in dealing with their supply chain now, where for a single shirt, the buttons are made one place, the design comes from another, the fabric comes from another, the assembly comes from another, the pieces literally can cross many jurisdictions. I wonder if there will be another setting in which the question of the responsibility for the purchaser to police that supply chain will be resolved. Of course, not simply with respect to intellectual property, labor standards, health, safety, environmental policy. That is the broader question of what responsibility the end commercial purchaser has to certify compliance with certain standards, going all the way back to the supply source itself, and maybe reaching into specific major input suppliers for its supplier would be. I wonder if that will that take place as part of a larger framework of discussions about trade policy. Is that something that ultimately is best suited to a broader discussion, because it seems to me that it also raises this question, as you know, has emerged in so many other settings as well. And does that become the forum in which we ultimately get an answer to your question?
I'd like to add that companies that rely on overseas suppliers can also play a role here. Many of the larger companies already require their suppliers to certify that they're following their native country's own laws, whether those are environmental laws, labor standards, or IP protection standards in some cases. So large American companies and even smaller companies that buy heavily overseas can also play a positive role here to protect the supply chain. And even if it may not be directly relevant to them, it could be very, very relevant to American companies who they also rely upon as suppliers. So I'd like to take this opportunity to a call on them to be mindful and to enforce the rules that they themselves have imposed through contract, because that strikes me as a very useful avenue for protecting American companies from unfair competition.
So as Rob mentioned earlier, the public authorities have a great capacity through their advocacy, their reporting activities, their publicity work, to not only raise concern among commercial participants, but among the larger public about what's taking place. And you see a bit of a market response now. There are increasing number of vendors who acquire their goods from a far-flung collection of suppliers who increasingly will try to identify for you where it came from. That is, you can look at an RFID chip and it will tell you here's where the cotton came from that was woven into the shirt that you're wearing now. Indeed, in some instances, here is the specific producer whose land it came from now. And it's a reaction, I think, to the concern that, again, your very useful question poses, which is what's the duty of the vendor to ensure fidelity to different national, international legal commands. And I think we see a public sentiment now as a result of this raising of awareness that demands of suppliers more and more. I'd like to have some idea of where you buy it and how they treat their laborers, how they behave within this larger context of legal commands.